All right, we are live. Greetings and welcome, audience, to the Wayfinder Foundation and Racial Justice Now. This is our very first virtual town hall regarding our recently released white paper on dismantling the preschool to prison pipeline. And today we're calling out the educational debt for the United States and how literacy has been a fight, particularly for the African American community, for literally centuries. And so this white paper for folks you can find on our website at wayfinder.foundation. You can also find information on both our Facebook page at Racial Justice Now and at Wayfinder Foundation. So we want to encourage each and every one of you. If you have questions, comments, we want to see the comments section very live. We want to encourage as much participation as possible from our audience. You guys are really in store for an amazing conversation today. Each and every panelist that you see here has an expertise in this space, in this conversation around education and how it shows up for African American children and families. Each and every person was chosen carefully by myself and the Wayfinder team to make sure that we are bringing information to everyone, including our parents, our policymakers. We're starting school, right? We want to start off school in the best possible way. And so we wanted to make sure to have this conversation, right, at the precipice for school starting across the country. I know that some schools, especially in the South, have already started. Some schools on the East Coast and probably all of our schools in the United States will be back in session after Labor Day. So, having said that, again, housekeeping rules, make sure that you all are engaging with us. Share this stream in your different networks. Again, we want as many people participating as possible, and we want it to be engaging. So welcome and thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to toss it to each panelist to introduce themselves, and then we're going to hop right into our conversation. Today, I'm happy to welcome, again, distinguished guest here, including, I will start with you, Dr. Akua, who is actually the principal author of our white paper. And we're so honored to be in relationship with you. And thank you so much for bringing your expertise to this space in authoring the white paper on behalf of Wayfinder Foundation. Dr. Akua?
Yeah, it's so good to be with you and everybody here. And I just want to thank you, Zakia and Nakima, for the wonderful work that you all are doing through the Wayfinder Foundation to help keep this information alive and also making sure that our parents and community members across the country are aware of what's happening. My name is Chika Akua. I'm the founder of Imani Enterprises, and I am also the executive director of the Teacher Transformation Institute. What we do is we create standards-based, research-driven, culturally relevant, and African-centered instructional strategies to increase student success. We always like to say that that just means that our children are brilliant, but many of them are in schools and school districts where they're seen as a problem rather than as people. But as we go into school districts and colleges and universities and teach teachers how to bring out the brilliance in our children, we don't just talk about the problem. We've created solutions, particularly as it relates to the issues around literacy. And so we've developed Reading Revolution Online as a solution to that, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that further. And lastly, I'm an assistant professor of educational leadership at Clark Atlanta University, one of our great HBCUs. So it's great to be here with you all today.
Yes, thank you so much. And welcome to the conversation. I will go then next to Dr. Alicia Blackwood. Please introduce yourself and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to be able to collaborate in this space. First up, I'm a mother, raised six beautiful children, and I have been involved in this work, started from a homeschooling parent and public school teacher for 12 years, instructional coach for literacy for another 7 years in the last 6 years as an assistant professor in literacy. So I do a lot to prepare the teachers in going out in the field in teaching literacy. This work is important. I started the It Takes a Village. And one of the things that I recognize is that a lot of our parents were not aware of the resources that are in community to be able to help support them. So I do a lot of trainings for parents in teaching them how to teach their children at home. So it's my pleasure to be here and be a part of the solution.
Yes, the solution. That's exactly what this is designed to be. Next, I will go to my colleague, Jeff Kennedy. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you our collective educational experiences. I am Jeff Kennedy. I am a 34-year-old early childhood educator within the Washington, D.C. public schools. That experience came with also challenges. I think everyone remembers the Michelle Rhee era of Washington, D.C. public schools, where hundreds, if not thousands, of Black educators were separated from the school system. I was one of the first who
Wow.
was separated from D.C. public schools. It took me actually 10 years to prevail, and I was awarded probably the highest amount for a teacher in United States history. I was supposed to be. So we'll continue that challenge later. My background also was in social work and in journalism. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with you. And remember that only 0.2 Black males are early childhood teachers in this country.
That's right. You had to let us know. Drop the bomb on that. Thank you, Jeff. And that's exactly one of the reasons why we have you in this space. I could not do anything on early childhood and literacy without having my good colleague who's been an educator again for over 30 years, early childhood kindergarten teacher, Black male kindergarten teacher in DC public schools. So thank you, Jeff. Next, I want to bring on my good friend, Dr. Leah Austin. Welcome, Dr. Austin.
Thank you. I am more than excited to be here. I will say good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'll just start off saying that I absolutely love Black children, have loved Black children from when I was a child and dreamt of being specifically a third grade teacher at a very young age. And then went on to become a third grade teacher. So I was sharing with the panelists backstage that I am a former educator. I guess once you're an educator, you're always an educator. So taught kindergarten, first grade, and third grade in DC public schools. So bring that experience to this conversation. I am also a mother. I am the mother of an amazing, beautiful mess of a fourth grade boy who also is just really important to not only my life, but my work. And speaking of work, I am the president and CEO of the National Black Child Development Institute, which is a 52-year-old organization that has been focused on the healthy development of Black children for forever, since it was founded by our amazing founder, Evelyn Moore. And I'll just quickly note that we are the only national organization focused on Black children during their early childhood development. We're a membership-based organization, so invite folks to become members. We have an affiliate network of 26 affiliates across the country that are doing advocacy work on behalf of Black children in their local communities. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Yes, MBCDI. I tell people all the time, and I share this really quickly because now, we have this movement for preschool promise that's been sweeping the country, right? And we got white folks out here acting like they came up with that idea. But no, it was Evelyn, like you said, back in the 70s, who tried to push our federal government, local governments to say, hey, Invest in preschool, early childhood, if you want to see success throughout children's lives. So anytime I'm in the space, in the different areas and work that I do, know that I'm always centering Evelyn's work and MBCDI and making sure that people know, no, this came from a Black woman. Like, we're not going to be in this space talking about this without acknowledging the history. So thank you, Dr. Austin, and thank you so much for MBCDI. Next, I want to bring up my colleague, Kareem Weaver. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. Glad to be here. Quick intro. I am a longtime educator. First of all, I'm a husband and father, former teacher and principal and all of that stuff, central office administrator. And, I did my thing in the classroom. I was teacher of the year. I was principal of the year. And my specialty was getting kids to read. And I took pride in that. Before that, I was working with a bunch of different organizations. I started off in Morehouse. I was in Morehouse College. I started off with my brother, Ennis Cosby, may he rest in peace. And he and I made a promise to each other years ago. He's dyslexic, or was dyslexic. And we made a promise to each other in King Chapel. We were going to end the school to prison pipeline. That was our goal, right? Ready, set, go. And it's been a few years later, but I'm still pushing on that. And I see literacy as a way to do that.
Absolutely.
And, so we made some progress. We had a long way to go, and I'm sure we'll get into it today, how the two connect. I'm glad that you all put out that report because that delves into a little bit of it. So I'm really glad to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, Kareem. Thank you so much for all the work and the years of work that you have put in to ensure educational justice and equity for our Black children around the country, but definitely there in the Bay Area and Oakland and in the state of California. We honor you for the work that you do. So thank you. Certainly, not least, but last but not least, is my colleague and our distinguished executive director for Wayfinder Foundation, Nakima Levy-Armstrong. Please introduce yourself. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here with this esteemed, amazing panel of Black experts who care about Black children in our community. I'm Nakima Levy-Armstrong. I'm a civil rights attorney by trade. I'm also an activist, as well as the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation. I'm based in Minneapolis, and education is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. It's what has propelled me forward as a Black woman in the fields that I'm in. And I also saw the difference that it made through my classmates when they didn't get the extra support that they needed, whether it was literacy supports or if there were emotional or mental health issues. A lot of times what we're seeing is young folks being criminalized. And so through our work at Wayfinder, we focus specifically on education justice and criminal justice with an emphasis on literacy, as well as dismantling the school to prison pipeline. So as an activist here, I've been very active in school board meetings and in the community, trying to advocate for change and working alongside and standing alongside Black parents. I am also a Black parent of 4 children, my youngest being 6 and my oldest being 26. So I've seen the range of different issues that we encounter when we're literally just trying to get the best quality of education for our children, and also thinking about the other children in our children's classrooms, which I think has to be a part of our role as Black parents, given everything that we're up against. But thank you for having me, Zakia, and I'm looking forward to leaning into this conversation today.
Yes, we are as well. Again, thank you so much. As you all can see from our viewing audience, we are definitely well equipped with these level of experts to have this important conversation again as we launch a new school year here in the United States. I will share that a little bit about me as well. I'm Zakia Singhar-Jabbar. I serve as the Director of Education Policy and Activism here at the Wayfinder Foundation. And I also co-founded Racial Justice Now, which is a community-based organization that ensures education equity and fighting against the school to prison pipeline. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to go ahead and jump right into the questions. And it's really important, that we, again, like I said, center Black families and Black children in this conversation and understand the history, right? Particularly as it relates to literacy. There was literally laws in this country where it was completely illegal, punishable by death, right? For Black people, formerly enslaved Africans, to even learn how to read, right? So I want to ask this first question, right, to you all. We've talked about it a little bit already. Please explain and discuss the relationship between literacy outcomes and the preschool to prison pipeline. We can start anywhere, but Dr. Austin, I'll come to you first.
Sure. Happy to kick it off. And of course, with this panel, I know I'm in good hands. So goodness, I mean, I think that to one, acknowledge what you've named about history. One of my favorite terms, and I know that Dr. James Anderson is mentioned in the report a number of times, but there's a term that he uses called rebel literate. And it's a term that I just absolutely love. And the definition of that term is he uses it to describe Black people, and in particular, Black parents and enslaved parents who, as he defines, would go to extreme lengths to ensure that their children could read. Yeah. And I love that term because, one, the definition I just provided. Two, as someone who has been in this field for a while and has done a number of different things, work on parent and family engagement, we know that often when it comes to Black parents, there's this narrative of Black parents not being involved or engaged. And it's an inaccurate portrayal because what we do know, given what you just named in terms of history, is that Black parents for a very long time have been acting in this kind of rebel literate role of going to extreme lengths to ensure their children have the educational resources they need, down to more recent examples where we have seen people who have used, different addresses and have been criminalized for that. But if we understand the reason why, we understand the connection between your address, your zip code, and the quality of school that your child might be able to attend. And so here we see parents going to the extreme length to ensure their children can read. So I just wanted to, one, sort of acknowledge the historical context that you started to name and add that to the conversation. And then also just to sort of bring to the preschool to prison pipeline. I think what's important to note there is that it speaks to the importance of literacy, that literacy is not just about being able to read words on a paper or on a page, but it is actually about access to information. And it's about a human being's ability to not only read the story, but what I think is so important in particular for Black people is to also be able to create and craft the story. And so what we see happening with the preschool to prison pipeline is that if you are sort of intentionally cutting off that access to information, which we know information is power, then what you can do is you can begin to sort of put this fence around people that puts them on a different path. It's another form of tracking, right? Which is what we know. The educational system that we have in the United States has always been about tracking people. Preschool to prison pipeline is another way of tracking. So if you keep children at a very young age from learning about themselves, from having access to information, from having the tools they need, the literacy tools that they need, then what you can do is you can begin to track them into a particular path. And we know that that path, when it comes to preschool to prison pipeline, is a path that starts very young. It starts as young as 3 and 4 year olds who the focus becomes on their behavior, and their behavior becomes adultified, and that adultified behavior becomes behavior where they are suspended, not just sent to the office and supported in terms of changing behavior, but they are literally suspended or they are expelled, and they are put on this path that takes them from preschool, takes them from school to a path that is about prison, is a path that's about punishment and locking children up for the long term. So I would start the conversation there, and of course welcome my colleagues to jump in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great synopsis in how we see this oppression, particularly as it relates to education, and Black folks continue to evolve, right? We fight, we win some battles and stuff, and here they come with another something else that we got to fight. Dr. Akul, I want to invite you in as well, to see, what you have to add to what Dr. Austin has so brilliantly shared.
Sure. In addition to what Dr. Austin has said, I always like to ground the conversation in who we were before the great disaster that we call the Ma'afa, or what some people tend to call slavery. It's so important that we understand that it was African people who introduced the world to reading and writing and language and literature. So we are largely responsible for world literacy. And as Asa Hilliard talks about, and I mentioned in the white paper, ancient Kemet and many of our original civilizations required armies of educated people, required armies of literate people. And that's what we require in our community today. So it's interesting to go from introducing the world to literacy to then being brought to America and it being against the law for us to read, where you can literally either be killed or maimed for learning to read. Another thing that's very important to mention is coming through and out of the enslavement experience, literacy was a community activity. I really want to stress that. It was not an individual pursuit. It was a community activity. And as Booker T. Washington talks about in Up From Slavery, he said, no person was too young and no person was too old. An entire race of people were going to school for the first time in the American context. And that's why it was a community activity. If you were a young person who had access to schooling, then you would then go home and teach your elders how to read. And so these are just a few of the things that we need to be aware of to kind of contextualize where we are now. In addition, the first two things that Black people built in America coming out of the enslavement experience was places of worship and schools. And both of them worked together. So in the places of worship, you were still learning how to read. And in the schools, you were learning spiritual and cultural values. So the two worked hand in hand. But now we see with the school to prison to pipeline that the average inmate has a reading level of about 6th grade. So what that tells us is when we make sure that our children are proficient in reading, then we are in many regards preventing them from going to that path.
That's right. Thank you. That's so important to make sure that folks know we literally had a history before enslavement, right before the Great Ma'afa, and I think America certainly does its best to make sure that they erase that from our memories. So we definitely stand on the shoulders of giants. And thank you for dropping the name of Dr. Asa Hilliard, one of our most brilliant. I call them African warrior scholars. So thank you for mentioning that. I want to pivot to Jeff and just see sort of, from your experience as a practitioner for over 30 years in early childhood, what is your sort of perspective on this question?
My range of teaching went from my first year, I taught 6th grade, and then I was a Head Start teacher. And I was part of Project Zero, authored by Howard Gardner, my first year teaching. And most of the training that I received was around music, movement, play, arts, how to integrate that within the early childhood setting. The understanding of grade levels and proficiency came when I entered into first grade, and after I received my master's, and during the time I was receiving my master's in education at Trinity here in DC. It was and I'm gonna go back to what Dr. Kua said about who we were in Africa. It required a world of literate individuals, and we were from Kemet all the way throughout Egypt to individuals who came from Greece to learn from the Africans. Most literate people. Greek society was nothing but a replication of African society, or what they tried to learn from the African society. So now here we are in America, and we have a system that was set up to ensure that people couldn't read. And why was that? You have the Nat Turner situation, which was August the 21st, just past August the 21st, where they made it throughout the South illegal to read. And the problem was that we had Black individuals who not only were reading, we had Black individuals who were writing books. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. And this continuous urge to label Black people as being deficient came from when we started things like grade level. And I think we need to get a better understanding of what grade level is, and how our whole system is stratified. And that came about in the beginning of the 20th century, mostly through the eugenic movement. And I needed to probably introduce myself a little better when I did introduce myself. I've been the CEO of the Rebecca Project for Justice now. I just left the Rebecca Project about in February, where I was the CEO for 3 years. And one of the things that we did at Rebecca was we took a look at eugenics throughout, from education to forced sterilization to housing policy to economic policy, how that came about. So when we start talking about literacy, we start talking about in the beginning of the 20th century, they created these tests. We have people like Bingham, Carl Bingham, who was one of the people who was key in creating the SAT. And we started these words like proficiency, grade level. And I think sometimes people have a misunderstanding of what these actual terms mean. When I was fired, unfortunately, in 2009, my whole class was proficient. My entire class was proficient. I was one of the few teachers who had moved a classroom, multiple grade levels. I was almost National Teacher of the Year. So when you start using terms like, okay, and why was that? That's because a different understanding of what was needed with the children. And I don't think there is, and I'm gonna stop right here. I don't think there is a difference between I think the pipeline, the schools are the prisons. The same institutions. When you say pipeline, when you look at a pipeline, it's one pipeline. It flows.
You dropped it there.
A place. It's the same institution. And when you start differentiating between the schools and the prisons, that's where the problem is. But
wow. Wow, Jeff, I already knew you was gonna do that, but yeah, the schools are the prisons. Y'all sit with that. Sit with that. And honestly, think about some of the experiences that you may have had as a child, and then think about the experiences that some of our children are having. Think about it. From the uniforms, walking in a single file line, no talking at lunch. That was literally at my son's elementary school in Dayton, Ohio. I couldn't believe it, especially the no talking at lunch. Dr. Alicia Blackwood, I see you. You are itching to get in here. Come on in here, sister.
Wow, I was just sitting with that.
Yes.
Because being raised in New York City, going to school in New York City, experiencing school in New York City, and later transition to Florida, teaching in Florida public schools, one of the largest school districts, and seeing examples. But what grounded me in this work is really stepping back and looking in the past to see how well our people were doing when it comes to literacy. So what happened? What were some of these shifts that we're seeing in public education? This deficit approach in thinking about our children. And so currently I'm mentioning this because I'm situated in an historical town with Brown versus Board of Education, where Farmville, Virginia, where Prince Edward County closed schools for 5 years.
Yep.
Absolutely no public schools. And so I'll sit at my local coffee shop, listening to elders who are sharing their stories of pain.
Yeah.
Going back to what Dr. Austin mentioned about access to information, they were being locked out. And so when we look at the scope of not having access to literacy, having access to education, to making sure that we are prepared to deal with the variety of life activities that needs to help us to support and develop community. And so when we talk about our children are not reading, when I listen to the elders and they talk about these Black teachers that were in the schools, they were not going into the civil rights movement when it comes to education in Florida, in Virginia. It was not about getting access to integrate in school. They were just seeking for equal rights and justice. So they were not complaining about their Black teachers because our students were learning, her students were reading. And so we fast forward to so much of the shifts that we're seeing happening into education, where every time I sit at a table, our children are not reading at a proficient level. What does that mean? And what message is that saying overall about our children, about the system, about the school, the structure of the school system?
Exactly. So it's certainly systemic design. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this evolution of making education, right, inaccessible, or making education so difficult for certain people to obtain. And I truly believe, clearly, because education, and particularly literacy, right, is freedom. Really, like it's freedom giving. It's hard to be a slave when you know better. You see what I'm saying? And so when you think about it from the oppressor's perspective, it makes sense that they want a easy person to deal with who has no knowledge, particularly has no knowledge of self. Kareem, I wanted to certainly bring you in as well and get your perspective, sir.
Thanks, Akia. Well, let's see. I think you started off in the right spot, 1831, Southampton, Virginia, Nat Turner. And we got to remember what happened. The rebellion, and they tore through the countryside doing what they did. And the United States government made a decision. We ain't never let this happen again. And the reason why they were able to organize and get their act together was because they could read. They discerned that was the key to the whole game. So look, if we're going to keep them in their place, they got to be illiterate. And that's why those anti-literacy laws popped up all around the country, not just in Virginia, but all through,
that's right,
all through the country. And, I think there's a lot to this. I only have a couple minutes, but I just want to say there have been efforts to keep some semblance, some vestige of that in place for years.
Years.
The country has not been incentivized to get Black children to read. Remember, it's zero sum. It's dog eat dog. It's your kids against my kids. A lot of times, that's how the country thinks about it. And
Sad.
so, rugged individualism. So why should we let this group over here be part of the competition? That's been some of the mindset. It's not all of it, but it's some of it. The question is, how badly do we want to be free? And folks who, we can dance all around it, but at the end of the day, I'm not tied to any political party. I'm not tied to any particular movement. I'm not tied to any methodology. Look, what's going to get our babies reading so that they can then do what they want to do, so that they can engage in the practice of freedom in life. Because you're talking about families being compromised. Good luck trying to get a job, keep a job, and bounce back from losing a job when you can't read. Woo! We're talking about educational opportunities, businesses that could be started, just the whole 9 yards. So for me, I look at this, yes, it's systemic, but it's also a matter of free people have to make up their mind that we're just not going to tolerate this madness anymore. So it's not just the fact that the dynamic of what it is, but it's also how are we allowing our children to be taught? And I'm going to tell you this. It's important that they have windows and mirrors, that they see teachers that look like themselves, that they're inspired by folks that look like them, and that's not enough. It's not enough. Yeah. We got some folks in there who have Black skin who not necessarily, hey, listen, it's not all about the outside, it's on the inside too. What counts. And so what can we do? How can we serve our children well? How can we prepare our teachers well? That means these universities got to step up because they're running games right now. While we watching TV in the football game, you go get your teacher's license and don't know how to teach a kid how to read at all. So it's a lot to this. But the first order of business is us making up our mind that we're not going to let this hustle keep going anymore. We could talk about statistics and dropout rates and incarceration rates and all the rest. Last thing I say, I interviewed my cousin. He was locked up for 23 years. We had the same birthday. That's my guy. I'm 1 year older than him. 23 years in a pen. And he was like, man, cuz they can't read in here. That's what it is. I'm telling you right now, and I already know, right? But he's telling me fresh out the pen.
The research supports that. That's right.
Yeah, he's fresh out the pen. Like, man, listen, this is like 4th grade level, and you can't understand the law, the briefs. You can understand the rules. He said it makes the cuffs tighter when you can't read. So that's all I say. I'm sure we'll keep the conversation going, but to me, it's a matter of survival for free people. That's right. It's a matter of survival for free people. Wow. Y'all are really bringing it today. So much gems already, just have been dropped. Thank you all. Nakima, I would love to hear your perspective as well. I know that you and I brainstormed. We talked about this as a team and was like, what we're hearing from our communities, what we're hearing from our families, particularly after COVID, when we had the shutdown of schools and everything, and how that's really exacerbated an already horrible problem. How then do we put together a framework and some recommendations to help our people? And you and I was like, what, we really need to partner with an educator who can put together an understanding and have it based on a historical analysis, but also have the solutions and the recommendations. So I just want to thank you, in terms of the brainstorming that you and I did together to bring this white paper into fruition. Please share, your thoughts as well, just in terms of this preschool to prison pipeline and how it's connected to our literacy rates as Black folks in this country.
Absolutely. Well, I've enjoyed everything I've heard from our panelists. It's just sad, right, when you really look at the state that our Black children and families are in, that we're in this position. But it's also no surprise because our country has not done what it needs to do to even begin to correct the injustices that have happened over the last several hundred years. And the fact that, the goalpost keeps moving, as we feel that we're making progress. And we see that with the latest attacks on affirmative action and DEI and just all the things, right, that are happening. But when I think about the preschool to prison pipeline, I think about the fact that at a very young age, it is a way of entrapping our youngest learners. And instead of capturing their imaginations, they're being boxed in through a series of policy decisions. And these are adults making the decisions to send a child to a school resource officer or to be suspended or expelled, as opposed to making sure that our children know how to read. And we know that it's very much so connected to this broader system of incarceration, as some of my co-panelists have mentioned. There are some states that use third grade reading scores to predict the number of prison beds they're going to need 10 years into the future. Because there's a direct correlation between illiteracy and incarceration, again, as some of the panelists have mentioned. My first time advocating on behalf of a child in Minneapolis public schools was several years ago. And that child was a 7-year-old biracial boy who had autism and who had acted out in his classroom. And he wound up being led away in handcuffs and placed in the back of a squad car. And, you know, again, 7 years old,
7, a baby,
disability, treated like a criminal. And in Minnesota, you're at least supposed to be 10 years old, right? Which is still too young, but you're at least supposed to be 10 before you are treated in that manner and brought to a juvenile detention center. But as we see kids younger and younger, I've seen news reports nationally of young folks being pushed out of schools 5 and 6 years old. There was a study by the Equal Justice Society that talked about the fact that every day 250 preschoolers are suspended from school. And they're suspended at a rate that's 3 times the rate of their older peers from elementary to high school. So again, this is a targeting of our babies, our youngest learners. And then I think about when I was in school, I had a love for reading, but what kind of books did I have to read? See Jane Run, blonde haired and blue eyed, no real representation of who our people were. And sadly, in too many classrooms across America, our youngest babies who would have a love for reading are not seeing themselves, their experiences, the way they talk, the way that they understand society and our culture being reflected in the reading materials. And then you add to that what some has referenced, which is what's happening with higher education. We went to an HBCU on a tour within a couple years ago, and we talked to the head of education at one of the schools in Houston. And we talked about how their school is very intentional about making sure that all of their prospective teachers know how to teach literacy, know how to teach reading to students. But that is an anomaly. Because most of our institutions of higher education do not teach teachers how to teach reading. And so we know that it is a systemic problem, that folks do not have a sense of the fierce urgency of now in terms of moving towards a solution, but they're acting with all deliberate speed, right? As we saw in the Brown v. Board decision, they're moving with all deliberate speed, which from my perspective means that this is intentional.
Oh yeah, completely. Thank you, Nakima. And that's such an excellent segue really to the next question, because we all know that we're literally in 2023 today living with the fact that we have some states, and it's sweeping the nation, right? Literally book bans. There's another attack on Black history. So how will the erasure of Black and American history, quite honestly, and book bans impact existing and future literacy outcomes for Black students, families, and communities? And Nakima, you talked about it a little bit, right? Like from your own experience, you know, learning how to read. All you saw was blonde hair, blue eye, you know, see Jane Run. I remember those books too. You know what I mean? But, you know, just the materials that our young people are learning from could also, you know, be contributing to the fact that some of the kids are not as engaged because they don't see themselves. So the question again is for our panelists, and it was such a great segue, is how are we, you know, dealing with this current attack, right? A frontal attack on Black history and these book bans that we see Florida seems to be leading us, but it's happening in state legislatures, including Alabama and other states in the South and in the Midwest, Oklahoma and other places. How is this going to be impacting the future literacy outcomes for Black children and our families? Dr. Akua, I'll come to you first this time.
Sure. Well, without resistance and persistence, it's going to have a devastating effect. But what we are seeing is resistance and persistence. And that persistence has to take a two-prong approach. That is resisting onslaught and attempts to erase our history within the system, but also going directly to our people outside of the system and ensuring that we are doing what we need to do with our children at home, as well as advocating in the public school sphere. I have to tell you, all of these responses have been amazing. But I almost fell out of my chair when Brother Jeff said the schools are the prisons.
Are the prisons, yeah.
And the reason why is because the schools are the prisons for the students as well as the teachers. Just like a prison is a prison for the inmate and the guard. Consider this now. And I just wrote a piece that came out 2 weeks ago on August 17th in the Washington Post, where I shared my experiences as a public school teacher. So like many of my colleagues on the panel here, my classroom was the site of my activism.
Yes.
And my years, and I'm in my 30th year in education, 14 as a public school teacher. The vast majority of my challenges in education were not with students. It was with teachers. I'm sorry, not with teachers, but with adults in general, those that were in leadership positions. And so shout out to all the other conscious and committed teachers who are trying to infuse our culture and our history into the schools, but are coming up against penalties and difficulties similar to what I experienced when I was doing it. So I really want to encourage people to read that article from the Washington Post. You can just Google my name and Washington Post, and it'll come up on August 17th. Make no mistake about it, while Florida is getting most of the press, this
is happening everywhere. Yeah.
Nationwide.
Yeah.
Over 35 states have attempted to pass similar legislation as Florida, and 14 have actually passed that legislation.
Alabama is one of them. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so this is why it's so important that we develop our own things. As I mentioned before, we've developed Reading Revolution online. You can check it out at readingrevolution.org. But again, going back to something that Brother Jeff said when he talked about grade levels. That was not our invention. That was somebody else's invention. When we developed Reading Revolution online, we ran into a challenge dealing with grade levels, because as we began to market it to school districts, we would be asked, okay, well, what grade level is this for? So then we would share a reading selection with them, and I would ask them, guess what grade level, guess what Lexile score this reading passage got? And they would say, well, this sounds like something that's 4th or 5th grade. But when we ran the Lexile score, it was 7th, 8th, or 9th grade.
Wow.
Meaning our standards and what our children are capable of is so much higher than the way that they rate these different reading passages. Why we have to be the ones in control of the narrative. If we want to be the ones that see the increases in literacy, if we want to be the ones to ensure that our history gets taught, we cannot just leave that to the public schools, but we do still need to advocate in those spaces, because our tax dollars are going towards producing those schools, those teachers, and those administrators, and they need to be held accountable.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Dr. Akua. Very succinct. Dr. Blackwood.
Yes, I am so in agreement in terms of making sure that we are advocating for change within the schools, but at the same time, we need to educate our community. We need to do the work. I started African Culture School over 16 years ago because I noticed that teaching in public schools, our children were not being exposed to their culture and their history. And so when we notice that we have that level where it is impacting our children, as a community, we still have to respond and do something about it. I love the Reading Revolution program from Dr. Akua, because it really centered our students. It really helped our students to see the best of who they are. And you utilize that whether you're in public schools or outside of the traditional system. Our children needs to be able to see that so that they can help them to make meaning of what they are learning. So this whole idea of the reading, we're bringing it into meaning making. And it is important that we center them into the best of our culture.
That's very important. Thank you. Absolutely. Dr. Austin, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on this question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I've just been listening to my colleagues, and I'm over here like totally in the amen corner. So amen to everything that's been said, and in such agreement. I mean, you know, Zakia, your question, you started off asking around the book bans and the sort of trend of what we're seeing, anti-Black history, etc., the impact on the potential impact on Black children. And I think the sad reality is that there's not much of an impact, because the reality is that these things weren't actually Black history wasn't fully being taught.
That's true.
Before now this distraction of needing to ban it, right? The books that are being banned, many weren't even really, they're not even in the majority of these schools. They're kind of non-existent lists of books that, oh my gosh, I wish these were real things that were happening in elementary schools. Like there's a bit of it that's it's an intentional distraction.
Yes, there you go.
Not important. We have to pay attention to it, but it's an intentional distraction. I mean, when we look at the literacy rates, which you all, you know, name in the report, book bans aren't going to we're already in a detrimental situation. And so the book bans, this isn't going to like have that great of an impact on our children. So I want to say that, and then I want to add to that what my colleagues have said, and I sort of reference it as it's a distraction, but it's a reminder that we have to take our children back. We have to take our children, and we as parents, we as community, organizations, sororities, fraternities, churches, like the entire kind of ecosystem, the village, we have to take our children back. We have to do things like make sure that the books that do reflect them, the books that do expand their understanding of not only who they are, but the world that they belong to, that we are buying those books, that we are providing those books, that we're making sure those kinds of those resources, whether it's books, whether it's toys, are in our homes, in our classrooms, in our libraries, in our churches, in our barbershops, like whatever spaces we're in, we just have to really be intentional about making sure these kinds of resources and tools are there. I think we have to teach our children their history. We have to teach them Black history.
That's on us.
That's on us. It's always on us. This is just another reminder that we have to continue to do that. The other thing I would say is that I'm also thinking, and we're thinking about this a lot with like our work at NBCDI and our network. There are also some leadership positions that we have to take on. So we need to be running for school board. Like that's like a very specific opportunity for people to really take on. We need more Black people running for school board. Not only joining the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association, but taking on leadership positions so that we're asking the right questions. So we're not just like on the end of hearing information, but we are on the proactive end of saying, no, like, what is the curriculum you're teaching my child? What's happening in your school? Like being able to like really present and ask those, being proactive and asking those questions. So definitely wanted to name that. And then one quick thing I also want to say, and I see in the comments, get a seat at the table. Let's take our seat at the table, is also continuing to push on the idea that there's the concept, like there's reading and there's also literacy. And when we unpack literacy, there's a diversity of literacies, right? So there's academic literacy, there's financial literacy, there's social literacy, cultural literacy, digital literacy. And so
that's a big one.
That's that one strategy for us is to think about what are the literacies that our children are more than proficient in that we can actually leverage and use. And I'll quickly I know our time. As the mother of a 9-year-old, I know that my child is digitally literate in some ways that are quite frankly frightening. And so I'm trying to figure out, and I think we need to do this, like I'm trying to figure out how do I leverage his ability to use Chat GPT. I'll tell y'all this quick story. He literally went on Chat GPT and asked it to compile a Father's Day message, because he's also kind of a jokester. And he sent the message to his dad, and it produced this like absolutely beautiful, phenomenal, wonderful message. On one hand, it's like humorous and it's funny. On the other hand, I was like, wait, but how do we leverage this skill? Like, how do we really understand this digital literacy that a lot of our children do? They may not have the academic literacy because, quite frankly, so many of them are just bored at school.
Bored to death, yeah.
These other literacies that they do have, so that we can also ensure they have the academic literacy that we know they need to have. So just wanted to add.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah, thank you, so much, for sharing that. That is such a good point, because, we're always, folks are so focused on so-called deficits based on somebody else's model, right? Based on somebody else's criteria, that we fail to see the brilliance, the innate brilliance of our children and African people in general. So I really appreciate you for teasing that out, Dr. Austin. I want to remind our viewers that we are almost to the point where we're going to be taking some questions from you all. Want to just, the comments have been great. Want to keep encouraging that. Make sure folks are sharing this. I really hope people are enjoying it. Seems like they are. But we also wanted to remind folks, get your questions ready if you have some for our panelists. Make sure you put that in the comments, and continue to engage with us. Thank you so much. So I want to now pivot to you, Jeff, and because you dropped the mic earlier, so I'm sure you have some connections even to make when it comes to how these, distractions around like the book bans and censorship and, just this all out attack on African education and Black history. I'm sure you probably have a connection to how that's connected to eugenics in some way, some evolution of the continuation of eugenics. I'd love to hear just your general thoughts.
Okay, let's go back and let's think about 2008, 2009.
Okay.
President Obama was elected. Right after President Obama elected, we had educational reform already in place. Started during the Bush years. Then, Reagan, 83 commission. The Bush years, No Child Left Behind, and now we're at Obama. Every Child Succeeds. Other kind of educational reform. Also, more teachers during that period in cities all across the country. More Black teachers in that period than any time in history. Any time after Brown versus Board. Brown versus Board was actually the largest loss of Black educators in the country until the basic Obama period came. So when you start looking at the educational reform movement, what are we reforming to, and what are we reforming from?
Come on.
So when you start talking about book bans, that's an extension of the educational reform movement. Here in Washington, D.C., we have a teacher's evaluation that was found to be racist 4 to 5 years ago. And Washington, D.C. still has a teacher's evaluation that is racist, that they say is helpful to children.
Wow.
Now, I want y'all to just squeeze your minds around that just for a second. Why does Washington, D.C. have as a teacher's evaluation that a major university, American university, is saying is racist? And how is that helpful to children? So when you start looking at Florida, Houston, Sacramento, Oakland, Chicago, New York, what is going on? You know, when we start thinking about what is segregation, where is segregation in schools, the most segregated schools is not in the South. The most segregated schools are in New York City.
Come on.
So, you know, we have to reevaluate what is it that we are doing as a country. I heard President Biden last night talk about the fact that the shooting in Jacksonville was one of the reasons could be because of I heard the spokesman for the Biden administration, not President Biden, I won't say anything inaccurate, suggested that the shooting in Jacksonville could have been basically because of the educational reforms they're making in Florida. Well, those educational reforms they're making in Florida is being done in Washington, D.C. Did anybody talk about all the violence that we have in Washington, D.C.?
Come on.
At the current time? So all of these things are being done to children. All of these things are being done to children in the name of what? Why are we doing things that we know do not work, and things that we've known for years that do work just get thrown to the side? I mean, and then we do have a lot of, unfortunately, we do have a lot of myths around educational progress. You know, and you know, those are things that we have to work through. And then when you look at it, where are the Black faces who are making these policy decisions?
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to Black children, who are the Black faces that are making these policy decisions? And when you look at who are the policy makers, you're not going to see many Black folks. I'm going to just tell you that right now. You're not going to see many people who've ever been in the classroom.
Right.
Because controlling education basically means you get to control people economics.
Ooh.
And I think one of the speakers said that early, right from the moment a child enters at school at 3 years old, it's the first time in many instances they will experience white supremacy.
Damn.
At 3 years old. And it is an absolute tragedy in many instances. And, you know, and the last thing I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna give it the mic to somebody else, is it was years before I actually worked at a bad school, something I considered to be not the best school. I worked at most of the better schools in the District of Columbia. I thought I was on another planet when I went to a school that was, I couldn't even describe it as a school.
Yeah.
And it was a prison. It was
Yeah.
a literal prison.
Yeah.
And it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
So when we start talking about, you know, what is really going on nationally around education, what is really going on educationally, what is going on nationally around families, the conversation has to start what happened in the beginning of the 20th century and what happened at the end of the 20th century. And those things we can't remember. We have to remember the history of, you know,
Yes.
Are we really going to have, is it really a good expectation to have a Black middle class with a high literacy rate in America? Is that something that is actually practical to many in America?
Interesting. Thanks for that, Jeff. Kareem, I feel like you have a perspective that you'd like to add as well. I think you one of the few of our folks on here that's actually on the West Coast, out there in Oakland and the Bay. What's your perspective?
Yeah, you may not want my perspective, but I can
No,
give
we
it.
want it. No, this is, yeah, no, we ain't doing censorship here.
So appreciate that. So So I've heard a lot of good things from the panelists. I agree with most of them, but we have to be very careful in the conversation about book banning and other things. It's very important. Let me just say that, you know, books shouldn't be censored or banned or whatever. That's ridiculous. I'm in a movie with LeVar Burton. He's one of the executive producers. You want to get him mad? Talk about book banning. Man, that brother go off because it just doesn't make sense. You know, it's just antithetical to who we're supposed to be as a free people. But
drop the name of your movie, Kareem. You just said that all people want to know what movie you was in with LeVar Burton. That's huge.
He was an executive producer. It's called The Right to Read film, and it follows 2 Black families and then my journey in Oakland, working with them, trying to get kids reading. That's all. It's all about literacy and reading. That's it.
Thank you.
It's called The Right to Read film.
The Right to Read film.
About the book banning, my perspective is a little different. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I can't spend too much energy arguing about something. You know, our kids can't read the books that's banned in the first place.
Damn. Well,
they are there's an underclass in America, and we who have made it, who've done different things, we got our jobs, our careers, our homes, or whatever. I think sometimes we forget about the faces at the bottom of the well.
Woo.
There is and we're not talking about 10%, we're talking about half, far below basic, meaning you don't even know what you don't know. You can't, you know, it might as well be Chinese or Sanskrit. It doesn't matter whether it's about Harriet Tubman or Bill Clinton. They don't care who. It could be about a white guy today or a black guy yesterday. It doesn't matter. They cannot read it, and we gotta. I don't want us to put the cart before the horse. I'm not saying the cart ain't important, but man, we need some horses out there running. We got to get these babies reading, and right now they just, you know, I remember, you know, I mentioned Ennis earlier. He had dyslexia, and he was basically flunking out of Morehouse. You know, his grades was rough. He was my study partner. His grades was rough, and he went to the summer program. I forget the name of the college. Some Landmark College. They went to this summer program for kids with special needs, and came back like a whole new man. A's and B's, and you know, when we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, I was like, man, I got to get kids, you know, out this track of being in prison. He was like, listen, let me tell you something. When you have dyslexia and nobody knows it, you're already in prison. It's just a different kind. And we talking about 15 to 20% of our kids with that. And we ain't even talked about that. You know, meanwhile, 48% of the people locked up, you know, in prison are dyslexic. 80-something% are functionally illiterate. That's the school to prison pipeline. Right? They can't crack the code. I mean, we sometimes, I think sometimes we have to look at what worked. And the brother mentioned it earlier, Brother Kennedy. You know, you look at folks like Marva Collins.
Yes.
What was she doing? What was she doing? It wasn't rocket science. It was good teaching. She had you know, the phonics, phonemic awareness, comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency in spades. And it wasn't all. It wasn't. And I'm gonna say this because this is. We cannot use race and class and culture to deflect from the fact that we don't know how to teach kids how to read.
Well,
it's important. All that is important, but we gotta make sure our teachers know how to get kids to crack the code and master it, so that they can do what they want to do, and then, you know, inspire them, breathe life for them, share them different aspects of their culture and this and that. But you know, man, I've been working with kids and families, and you know, when I was a teacher, I was getting 98% of kids to read. I always won, seemed like, but for the most part, I was getting them to read. Very few people ever asked me how I did that. Only 5 people ever asked me, "How'd you do that?"
Wow.
One principal and 4 teachers.
Right.
Ever asked me, "Hey Weaver, how'd you get all your kids reading?" Nobody. And so I just want to make sure we don't just spin ourselves around in a knot, you know, and get stirred. It's important to get that energy and momentum, but man, our babies can't crack the code, and we got to be, you know, I'm gonna be dogged about it. And on top of that, actually, I'm gonna leave it right there.
No, say it. No, please.
I don't want us to get manipulated. It's like you know, so when I was in South Carolina, I used to be an administrator for the juvenile justice facility, basically the youth prison. They have schools in juvie. They have schools in these facilities. I don't know if people know that, from 8th to 12th grade, basically. And I broke all kind of rules and took, they volunteered, they signed up for it, but I took them to church. So 2 vans full of kids, you know, going to church, you're breaking all kind of rules. and the reason why I did it was because them old ladies in the Sundays, because you know they had Sunday school and they got kitchens and everything. They treated them good, they fed them, and they taught them how to read.
Yes.
Wow.
They had the little Sunday school books. You know, these old ladies, Mother Dewdrop, Mother Wardlow,
Come on.
they taught them boys and girls how to read.
Come
It was
on.
like, did you know that these young people can't read them? When they found out they couldn't read them little things, man, they went at it. They fed them. And matter of fact, I had one young man who asked me, Weaver, can I extend just another word? Can he stay longer? Because he was about to get released. I'm starting to read. I just need
Wow.
a little more time.
Wow.
Young man asking to stay. I was like, man, I can't. That's not my call. But he was trying to figure out how he could stay in jail to
Lord,
learn
have
how to
mercy.
read. So we gotta. I just want us. All of this is important.
That's an indictment, though.
Man,
That's
I'm
an
trying to tell you,
indictment
it
on
haunts
schools.
me. It haunts me.
Yes.
It haunts me. So it's hard for me to get too worked up about anything else when I know good and well, you know, unless you 6'2", 230 pounds and run a 4.40, you ain't got nothing coming. You ain't got
Lord,
nothing
have
coming.
mercy.
Now, if you got that type of demographic on you, then maybe we gonna find you some help. we got you. Don't be 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan. We got you.
Yeah.
Other than that, but most of our kids just regular kids and they can't crack the code, and we got to make sure that we focusing on them and getting them to the position where they can then make decisions on their life trajectory on their own and with their family and everything else. So I just throw that out there.
Zakia, let me jump in on something Dr. Weaver just said, please.
Okay. Yeah.
Is
Go
okay?
ahead. And then yeah.
Okay. Dr. Weaver just said that that only 5 people ever asked him, how did you get these kids reading? I remember the school that I talked about this, that was really struggling, that I was at. We were in a staff meeting and we had maybe 42, 43 teachers in the building. And the principal said, I think we had at that time maybe 400 students, like 300 and something students. And the principal, I never forget this, we were in a staff meeting. The principal said only 54 children in the school are proficient. And of those, and she looked at the numbers and she said, of those 54 children that were proficient, I had taught like 42 of them.
Wow.
So then she said, then the principal looks around, she says, maybe y'all need to do what Mr. Kennedy is doing. And I'll never forget, one teacher said, Mr. Kennedy talks to the kids like they little babies. I was teaching 1st grade.
Lord.
So I tell that story to say nobody ever asked. Well, I can't say nobody. That's not true. Some of my colleagues did. But not a lot of people asked me, how did you get all the children in your class proficient year after year? Because why? Because of the color of my skin and my gender.
Well, I love the fact that you brought in the gender. That needs to be a whole conversation in and of itself. That's certainly political, but we have to do that on the next one. Before I pivot to our final question, and then we do have several questions in the chat. We invited our listeners. This has been great, y'all. I don't know if y'all been paying attention to the comments. We have a very engaged listeners. Yeah, I'm coming to you, Nikema.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of very engaged listeners. So I just want to, again, continue to encourage people who are listening. Please share this out. I know you all are enjoying it. We want to get as many people involved in listening to this as possible. And final reminder to put questions in the comments. And so I'm going to come to you, Nikema, before we go to our final question. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought you forgot about me.
No, I didn't forget. I got you.
Burning insight to add. So Thank you for that. I just want to say I agree with what I see from one of our commentators and colleagues. Tanisha People says maybe book bans are a distraction, but the erasure is damaging to identity development.
Yes.
I would have to agree with that. I don't think that is something that we can ignore. I tried to ignore for a long time, but as I started seeing more and more reports, I realized that this is really political.
Absolutely.
And folks are using this notion of book bans to leverage their political power, to leverage racist attacks against Black folks. There's an article that came out this month in Education Week, and it says one of the country's largest districts is turning school libraries into discipline rooms.
Oh my God, yes.
And they're looking at what happened in Houston, where school librarians and media specialists at 28 of Houston's 274 campuses won't be returning to their former jobs this coming school year, because now those libraries are being transformed into disciplinary centers. And that is all connected to this notion around book bans. And then when you look at who's driving it, you have groups like Moms for Liberty.
Come on.
Has tens of thousands of followers on Instagram, have had national meetings, have actually been able to influence things politically. So from my understanding, roughly 30% of the candidates that they endorsed actually got into office, right? So they're carrying out these agendas. And it's all tied into these attacks against our history, affirmative action, DEI. And it also opens the door to fascism.
Yes.
If we're silent about this, what will they do next? So I would urge us to pay attention. I don't think we need to give into the distractions of it, but we need to understand that it is part of a robust political agenda meant to suppress us, to silence us, to erase our history, to deny us access to opportunity, and of course, to shift attention away from the issues that we continue to face day in and day out as Black folks. But it is something that we have to speak out against, that we have to fight back against. And I was really impressed by the folks in Florida after this most recent horrible tragedy that happened in Jacksonville. When DeSantis tried to show up, they booed him. Black folks were not having it because they know the attacks that he's bringing is a part of this larger political agenda to silence and suppress us. So I will say that our answer at Wayfinder has been to not only pay attention to these issues, but we've launched Moms for Liberation, which folks can tap into on Instagram. Please. We're using Moms for Liberation to educate folks around these issues of book bans and different things that are happening around the country to try to erase our history and to silence our voices. We've also partnered with school board partners to launch a new fellowship opportunity for Black and brown women anywhere around the country who are interested in running for a school board seat, because these same individuals that I'm talking about have been intentionally trying to upend our school boards around the nation. And they have been putting school board members on hit lists, target lists to upend them from their seats and insert people who we know are antithetical to our history, our culture, what we stand for, and our progress. So that's one way that we're fighting back, by trying to prepare Black and brown women and mothers to run for school boards so that they can not only have a seat at the table, but they can help shape what the table looks like, what's on the agenda, etc.
That's
so
right.
Those are things that we're doing to fight back. I'm also committed to using my voice more in this fight to take these people on and raise awareness around these issues. I majored in African American studies when I went to USC. And I know that having that historical background played a tremendous role in me being who I am as a civil rights lawyer today. And I want to see more of our young folks have those opportunities to study their history in schools and to know how much value our history has, as opposed to what we see these folks trying to do from the right-wing perspective and attack who we are and what we stand for.
Thank you, Nakima. I am so honored that you have started the Moms for Liberation. This is a moment for all of us, all of our listeners, all of our supporters. We clearly need to push back. And I'm glad that Wayfinder Foundation has this partnership with school board partners to make sure that we're bringing something to the table in terms of identifying Black and brown women across this country, the moms for liberation, right? Because our voices matter too. We got Black and brown moms out here who want our children to have access to the best that this country and anywhere has to offer, right? And we have a right to do that. In fact, we have a legacy of ensuring that as Black women in this country. Shout out to Marva Collins. Shout out to Mary McLeod Bethune. Shout out to Nanny Helen Burroughs. Let's call the names of these Black women ancestors who fought to make sure that Black children had the right to read, literacy, and taught, right? So thank you, Moms for Liberation. I have to say this before I go to the final question, is that this is also a time for our colleagues in philanthropy to step up. It really is. It is a time for our colleagues in philanthropy who support education equity specifically to provide the resources needed, because Moms for Liberty, oh, they rolling.
They got money. They got power.
Got plenty of money.
Influence.
Do you hear me?
They are on the news stations, controlling the narrative.
Thank you. They are rolling. 100%. So we need philanthropy to step up, support Moms for Liberation, right? Support the work of the folks that are on this call, the organizations that are connected to the people on this call, National Black Child Development Institute, right? Step up in terms of that and philanthropy. Wayfinder Foundation, right? Moms for Liberation, Racial Justice Now, It Takes a Village. All of our organizations, right? We're all doing this work for education equity. And if we really are going to have this fight with Moms for Liberty, again, they are rolling. They have, it's almost like they came overnight and had all this influence. I'm like, damn, where these white women come from? Like they came in bulldozing, you know, so we have a right to do that as well. So I just want to, again, thank you, Nakima, School Board Partners, Wayfinder Foundation, for launching the Moms for Liberation. Again, we encourage everyone to go on Instagram, follow Moms for Liberation, support Moms for Liberation, and let's start using that language more in our different spaces. Final question, and because you know we got to talk about some solutions, right?
Yes.
So what are successful models for teaching literacy currently that exist? How can we scale those, right? And then how can we better engage and support our parents and communities to be able to advocate for that expansion? I really want everyone to take on that question and answer it. And so Dr. Austin, I'll come to you first this time.
So I'm actually going to, I will answer the question, but I'm going to pivot and welcome my practitioner colleagues, so Jeff and Kareem, who have demonstrated expertise and experience, to jump in, and then I'm happy to add on to what they share.
Awesome. I would love for Jeff, if you want to hop in, and then Kareem.
Okay. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. Whole language has always worked. Let's just get that out of the way. We need to get away from standardized testing. That's what's driving this. That's standardized testing is what's driving this whole reading instruction killing. Because people are just simply teaching to the test. They're not teaching children to read. They're not teaching children critical thinking skills. And I have to respond to Nakima. Just for a quick second, what she said around African American studies. Well, when we started the CRT movement, CRT basically they're just trying to kill African American studies.
Yeah,
you know, it's that critical race theory. They try to kill anything that has to do with African American studies.
Right.
But you ask how Moms for Liberty became so widely known very quickly, because you had the Mothers of Massive Resistance. You've always had a conservative movement that was organized to stop Black folks in certain particular areas so they could do that. Now I'm gonna get back to that, you know, what works. Whole language works. A literate environment works. So many things that we have, we know that work, but that's not what we're doing. We have teachers now who are afraid of their jobs, they're afraid for their careers because they have to get these standardized test scores up. And we have to move away from standardized tests. That was something that President Obama promised to do on MSNBC. I think you were in the audience, Sakia, that I had my good friend ask them about. And he promised to cut out standardized tests.
It was Biden, not Obama, but yeah, I got you.
Yes, President Biden, yes, to cut out standardized tests because of their history of eugenics. So we really have to just say what's really going on in education in this country. So I'm done right there. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Kareem.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. So this really is the nuts and bolts of it. And I'm probably different with Brother Kennedy on this a little bit, but I'm going to take myself out of it and refer us to the evidence. We all have different ideas of what works. But if you told me, hey, Kareem, I've been throwing darts against the wall for 30 years, and for 30 years, all my kids been reading, I'd listen. I'm looking at results. I'm going to put in the chat right now what the American Federation of Teachers says are the elements of an effective reading program. And they've been saying this for 30 years. Ain't nobody been listening to them. Nobody been listening to them. AFT they've been consistent about it. Matter of fact, they're one of the sponsors of that Reading Universe stuff, of their website. But I would go there. They got the elements of an effective reading program. It's the same thing that the federal government said twice. Once with, what was that report? Oh, Lord have mercy. It's like 300-some pages. Oh, man. So they had two reports, actually 3 reports. One was for English and then one was for biliteracy. Congress asked the Department of Ed, hey, we got to get our kids reading. What's going on? Why? And they came up with this report. And basically, it says these are the things that you got to do. These are the elements. And it's basically the same thing that AFT has been saying. The only difference was they came back with a second report and they said you also have to have oral language development and writing, especially for your bilingual learners and stuff. But the phonics, phonemic awareness, comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency, the same stuff Marvin Collins was doing. Yes. That's what we got to do. But we got to do it consistently, not just throwing stuff at the wall opportunistically. But those are in AFT's thing there. But I'll leave you with one thing, and I'll put the link to that in here too. I would urge everybody to
Thank you for the resources. I love it.
I urge everybody to read the abstract to this one.
Resources.
The Department of Justice came out with a report. They did research because they were trying to reduce recidivism. How can we get these kids from coming to jail so much? And the jail said they can't read and they don't know how to decode.
Yes.
You read the abstract for what the prisons say. The prisons say there's some young people here. The majority of them, they have some sort of a special ed diagnosis, but there's no neurological differences. In other words, ain't nothing wrong with these kids.
Right.
They wasn't never taught to read. This is what the jails say. And they break down what's needed. Now, they don't say phonics, they say alphabetics. What is this? Right? So I would urge you to read 1, what AFT had to say. 2, do a little research on Marvin Collins. But 3, look at what the prisons were talking about, because it's all the same thing. We got to we got to give them the tools in a structured way. It doesn't mean that teachers can't have their own flourish and their own flair. That's what makes us us. The teachers gonna do what we gonna do. But you got to make sure that we keep skill development at the center, especially to build a foundation. Now, when you get that foundation set, you can build a house however you want to, but we got to make sure the foundation is solid. So that's the biggest hurdle that we got to get our kids. The foundation, it's not being set up right. And there's some people who blame the parents and they blame this. Okay, fine, whatever. People can, whatever. All I know is that if you build a house on a good foundation, good things happen. So I'll leave with that.
Coming to you, Dr. Blackwood, and after that, Dr. Akua.
Yes, I am so in agreement. Thank you, Kareem Weaver, for just laying that foundation and setting that, because it is so important that we set a solid foundation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to encourage you to read the white paper, because the way that it is structured, it gives us a comprehensive view. Don't forget about the 15 recommendations in at the end of the white paper.
Please, yep.
What we know that is working, go straight to Dr. Goldie Mohammed's framework, because she brings forth a comprehensive view of how we go about setting the foundation, training our teachers, bringing that joy in the space. I'm passionate about this work because I was one of those struggling readers in New York City that didn't figure it out until I started teaching reading, what was going on. We have to lay that solid foundation. We have to be intentional. We have to be systematic in how we approach the work. Thank you.
Absolutely, Dr. Akua. And thank you for pointing people to the white paper and the recommendations that were made. I just put the link to the white paper, the black paper, in the chat. Dr. Akua.
Yes, listen, I've been taking so many notes.
I see you over there.
I want to start off with where our children begin when they come into the world. And the way of solutions is very mindful to be, it's important to be mindful of what Dr. Amos Wilson tells us about childhood development. And he tells us that of all the studies that have been done by white people about Black children outperform white children on all of the early childhood tests, meaning when they come out of the womb, those first tests that doctors give, the APGAR test and others, where the child has to sit up, track you across the room with your eyes, all those sorts of things. Black children outperform white children. That's not Dr. Akua speaking. That's not even Dr. Amos Wilson speaking. He's reviewing the research literature of white social scientists who did that. So we come out ready to deal. We come out ready to perform and do so. But something happens by the time we get in preschool and in pre-K and kindergarten and so forth. One of the things that we have to do is emphasize in our community literacy at home. I had a friend of mine who was an elementary school principal, and when he was assigned to a particular school, he began to look at the reading data and found out that his kindergartners and first graders were failing this test. And one of the items on the test was simply to hold a book right side up. And so when he found out that his children didn't know how to do this, he started visiting homes in the community. And what he found astounded him. He found out that there were no books in the home. When I say no books, I mean none. I said, bro, this is about 10 years ago. I was like, bro, not even a Jet magazine. Every Black home used to have at least a Jet mag. He said, bro, I'm telling you, there was no literature of any kind in the homes. So we have to emphasize to our young parents that there must be literature in the home. Secondly, I would like to call everyone's attention to the just tremendous work that Marcus Klein is doing with Freedom Home Academy in Chicago. Google him, friend him on Facebook, and look at some of the videos of him working with 4, 5, and 6-year-old children, and they're doing college level reading. They're reading lists of words that many of us don't even know the meaning of, medical terms, business terms, all these different things. He's developed a very successful method and a track record of success of increasing literacy as well as numeracy. So that's a perfect example. Marcus Klein with Kline, Freedom Home Academy. Just go on YouTube.
Home Academy is right there in Chicago. It's an amazing school, independent Black school.
Absolutely. The resource that we produced that I mentioned before is called Reading Revolution Online. It combines cultural competency with reading comprehension, vocabulary development. There's a captioned video to go along with each of the brief reading selections of Black heroes and sheroes, ancient and modern. Also deals with grammar and writing skills. So you can go to readingrevolution.org. Again, readingrevolution.org. And then lastly, I want to reiterate what Dr. Blackwood mentioned about Black joy. That is so important to bring to the teaching of anything in our community is Black joy and Black love. what I was hearing when Dr. Weaver was talking about how he took these juveniles to a Black church. What I heard in his description, though he didn't say it in these words, what I heard was those Black church ladies loved on those Black
Yes,
children.
love them. Yes.
Loved them because they saw their own sons, their own nephews, their own grandchildren, their own husbands in those young boys. So
Yeah.
we must make sure that we understand the power of Black love and Black joy as it relates to increasing academic outcomes for our children. Many of our children are in schools where they are not surrounded by that Black love. As a matter of fact, the research literature shows that in many cases, they're dealing with what's called spirit killing.
Yes. Dr. Bettina Love talks about that.
Yes. So we definitely have to get back to Black love and Black joy in the process of educating our children.
Thank you so much. I know that we are completely, run over time, and I want to allow people to have their final comments. And also point folks, I'm going to say both of these two questions. So if folks can, after the broadcast, folks can go back and respond on the comments. One of them came from advocating for kids. And the question was, what are some of the ways that community can put pressure on local school boards to stop ignoring the needs around Black literacy? The other question came from Brother Hashem Jabbar around, how can we be supporting basically Black schools, building our own schools? There was a strong independent Black school movement, as we know, in the 70s and 80s. And I just want to let people know this is only the first virtual town hall. We're going to come back for part 2 of this because there's still so much more to be discussed. And we're going to use that town hall to focus a lot more around the 15 recommendations that the white paper lists, and also just focus on the solutions. This one obviously, wanted to center us and start us on, what the issues are, what the problems are. But this is just the first, again, virtual town hall. We will be hosting another one, so stay tuned to Wayfinder Foundation's Facebook page to learn more about when that would come up. So I wanted to pivot back to you, Dr. Austin, and then Nakima can close us out.
Sure. And I'll be really quick because I know we're over. So 3 quick things that tie into your original question you asked about what works, and then the 2 questions that just came up. So the question about advocating, I think the most simple answer I can give is that we have to show up to the meetings. Like there are school board meetings. They're not incredibly exciting.
No, they're pretty boring. Yeah, they're boring. We got to show up
and ask questions and make our voices loud and clear. The second thing I love the question around encouraging more Black people to start their own schools.
Yes.
I'm happy to actually provide afterwards. There's some resources around like fellowship programs and places that you can actually access capital. You can access dollars if you are interested in starting a school. So happy to just share that resource afterwards.
Please.
And then lastly, I'll just say I really appreciated hearing everyone's expertise on what is working and what works for teaching children to read. I'll just share with you all that when my son started many, many years ago at his early literacy program, they told us if there's nothing else you can do, and I still do this to this day, and he's 9, they said, ask your child or your children 6 questions every day, no matter what they're looking, if they're watching TV, they're on YouTube, they're talking to you about something, instead of, shushing them, ask them 6 questions. And it's literally the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. Literally just every single day, asking those questions will help your child become a better, stronger reader. And you also will find some really fascinating and just interesting conversation that you'll find yourself in with your child or your children.
I love that. I'm going to do that with my 9-year-old. Yep. Thank you so much. Nakima, I want to bring it to you and help us close out into our next town hall.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Zakia, for organizing this town hall and pulling all of us together. I feel like we've been bathed in Black brilliance.
Yes.
Of the last hour and a half, I've learned so much.
Me too.
From my colleagues on this panel, and I'm just grateful that we're having this conversation and that so many folks decided to tune in and join us on this journey. I just want to lift up a couple of grassroots organizations that have been doing a tremendous job trying to fill in the gaps when they see issues happening in our community. There's a woman here in the Twin Cities named Titi Layo Bidiaco who started We Win When We Read in the midst of the pandemic to get children's books by Black authors into the hands of Black children and Black families free of charge. And they've given out thousands upon thousands of books for free, and also created a literacy room that happens in a local church on Saturday mornings where they bring in Black authors to read with preschool and elementary age children. So that's a beautiful example of a grassroots approach to these issues. And TT taught public school before deciding to take matters into her own hands. I also want to shout out the women in the Delta region of Mississippi who founded the Coalition to End Corporal Punishment. And they have compared some of the physical abuse that happens in schools to the lash of the slave whip. And they've been organizing and trying to educate people and parents around these issues and the kinds of environments that are being created when adults in schools are able to physically abuse children who they don't think are, acting right or, following the rules and the protocols. And these are Black women, again, who are organizing, taking matters into their own hands. They're writing op-eds. They're getting their communities involved in their challenging policies. That's what I think it's going to take for us to fight against this onslaught of attacks that we're experiencing on every hand. And I just want to remind us the work is not over, right? We just saw the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington happen yesterday, that March for Jobs and Freedom. Some progress has been made, but many of us still have to march for jobs, freedom.
And freedom today, right? 2023.
Exactly. 60 years later. So let's continue to gird up our loins and be vigilant and take in this information and resources that we've heard here today. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you all so much. This has been a blessing to me. Again, I've learned so much, from my colleagues. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very intentional, the colleagues that I brought together on this very first virtual town hall. Wayfinder Foundation, Racial Justice Now is committed to continuing this work because we know that academic excellence is definitely the prerequisite for our ultimate liberation as a people. So we are honored to be in this work and in this space with so many of you. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for those of you who asked questions and those of you who have been just completely engaged. This is such an engaged audience. So thank you all so much. This will be up as a replay, so you can continue to share this, continue to use this as a form of professional development. I saw, Guilford County School Board member Kim Irby, who's also a member of the Dignity in Schools campaign, said, she wants to bring Dr. Akua back to the Guilford County. She says she felt like this was professional development, this virtual town hall. So, this is what it's about. This is the intention. We want to provide resources to our people, to the general public, to our families, to everyone to help us in moving the needle forward for Black literacy and Black educational excellence. With that, thank you all so much for supporting the Wayfinder Foundation, Racial Justice Now, MBCDI, and all of the organizations that are represented here today. We hope that you all stay and continue to follow our work and join us again for the next virtual town hall. You'll find out information if you follow Wayfinder Foundation's Facebook page about when that will happen. With that, thank you all so much for joining, and thanks to our panelists. Good evening, everyone.